Well, welcome to the Kiwanis International and Safe Hiring Solutions background screening partnership video. I'm Mike McCarty. I'm the CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions, and you can contact me at any time, toll free 888-215-8296, or via my email address right here, and be happy to answer any questions you might have after you view this short little video. Just to give you a little background on who we are, I'm the founder and CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions. I'm also co-founder and CEO of eReference Check, which is an automated reference checking platform. I was a violent crime detective with the Metro Nashville, Tennessee Police Department. Safe Hiring currently has about 3,000 clients across the United States that range from, relationships like Kiwanis International to public school systems to large corporations. So very diverse kind of client backgrounds. I also provide a lot of violence prevention training and consulting. Have done work for the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in Glencoe, Georgia, National Sheriff's Association, Indiana Law Enforcement Training Academy, and numerous other state attorney general's offices. So I want to give you just a little of what I would call truth about the background screening industry as you're kind of navigating the background screening industry, looking for a partner to provide background checks for, your club. What we really need to do is look at, what is the industry, how does it function, because there's several things within the industry that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you have a kind of a background in the background screening industry. The first thing I'd mention is a highly unregulated industry, especially as it relates to volunteer screening. And what I mean by that is there is a wide use of really low quality $9, $10, national criminal type database searches, and those kind of rule the volunteer screening market. They're terribly incomplete. You have huge and high failure rates, even for sex offenders, but they tend to be used quite frequently for volunteer organizations because they're attractive, they're very inexpensive, and there's not a lot of regulation out there that really tells a volunteer organization that you need to be doing a background check that meets this certain criteria. So historically, the background screening industry has delivered what I would call a very low quality product and service. So it's really been more concerned with speed and cheapness than it has been with accuracy and quality. So, no real standard of care. This reliance on the incomplete databases. The Fair Credit Reporting Act provides consumer protection, but it doesn't have any standard of care. Beyond that, you're using up-to-date information. A couple other real nuances that you'll see with background screening is there's a lot of reports that are limited to 7 years. The industry tends to work on a 7-year rule, meaning if something happened within the last 7 years, we're going to report it. If it happened after 7 years, we're not necessarily going to report that. So that is something you really need to take a look at. At Safe Hiring, we don't limit the reporting to 7 years. The only time we would limit the reporting to 7 years is if your state or if a local law, would mandate that reporting is limited. Otherwise, we're going to provide you all the data that we can find, and you make those, volunteer hiring decisions based on your policies. And then alias names. And what we mean by alias names, that's just a legal way of saying, somebody might have had a former married name, a maiden name. Men have changed their names. So we're going to search all names associated with those candidates. The background screening industry typically does not, or if they do provide that function, they charge you a fee for each one of those names. So if you've got a $20 background check and they've got 3 names, it's actually going to be a $60 background check. We don't. We bundle all of those up in one price. That $19.95 for the Kiwanis Level 1 National Background Check would include those alias names. Need to understand a little bit about liability. We could certainly talk for, the next hour about liability, so we're going to make this a very succinct and quick little slide just to kind of make you aware that there is liability. and you can, as a volunteer organization, be held liable for obviously not doing background checks, but you can even be, find yourself in a position where you could potentially be sued if you're doing these very low quality background checks, and so it doesn't elicit the information on a particular candidate because you went with a really cheap solution, and in fact this person had a criminal record, and that it might have been found if you were doing a more comprehensive background check. And that's really kind of the nature of documenting your due diligence. And when you look at kind of negligent hiring, and I know we're talking about volunteers, but when you look at negligent hiring says, if I knew or should have known. Well, typically you're not going to know that your candidates, have a violent past history. It's not going to be written on their forehead. It's the should have known that oftentimes gets volunteer organizations in trouble. Had I done a quality background check, I would have known that this person was maybe a violent sex offender, and I wouldn't have allowed them to volunteer. And this Southport Little League case that I'm referencing here is Southport, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis, and they had a volunteer baseball coach that was a convicted sex offender, and they had done no background check, and they allowed him to coach. He actually molested 2 young boys on that baseball team, but when they were sued, it was found under negligent hiring. Even though he was a full-fledged volunteer, they found them negligent under this negligent hiring doctrine. So it's not really worth the risk of using these really cheap, outdated database searches, even though a $7 or $8 or $9 background check looks highly appealing. It's simply just not worth the risk. It's not worth placing children at risk to save $5 or $6 when you could spend that extra few dollars and ensure that that your children are safe. So the best practices in volunteer background screening at a minimum should contain these 4 items. First is a Social Security verification, where you're verifying identity, any names they've been known by, address history so you can see where the individuals have lived. We are going to use a national criminal database as a tool. It's not a standalone screening program, but we're using it as a tool. National sex offender search, and then a county criminal search. And the way we have to look at this is you've got a national criminal database and you've got the county criminal searches. And these two have to be used together. Neither one of them are adequate to stand alone and use as a standalone product. But when you pair the two together, that's when you get these checks and balances to minimize the risk of ever missing anything on an unsuitable potential volunteer. So how does this process work? Well, with Kiwanis, you've got 2 options. You can set up an account with Safe Hiring. This is where you set up an account and you can either be paperless or you can manually enter the information, but you have a relationship with Safe Hiring, and you can order background checks as you need them. Or we have created a Kiwanis self-screening account, and how this account works is you might have just a handful of volunteers that you need to screen, and this is kind of sporadic, and maybe you don't want to take the time or effort to set up an account. You can actually direct your volunteers to this link. They would basically click on a link, sign an e-authorization, input their information, pay for a background check, and in 3 to 4 business days your volunteer would get a background check report sent back to them as part of their email, and then they could provide that to the club. So you've got those 2 options. But with either option, here's how the background checks are processed. You're going to have a client manager that's assigned to the Kiwanis, and they review every order for accuracy. So when that report comes in, it runs a social trace, looks at their address history, any names they've been known by, and it freezes that before it orders any other parts of that background screening report, because we want our client service manager, a pair of human eyes, to actually look at that report, see if there's any misspelling, see if there's any address changes, if there's any names, any data that needs to be added to that report. They'll make those changes. And once they do that, they'll release the report for search. So it goes out to the databases, it comes back, it goes to the counties, where the researchers will walk into the courts and check and put the information back into the system. And once the reports are completed, it freezes that report again and notifies the client manager, who then reviews the report, proofs it, checks it for accuracy, and then they can hit a release button, which would then send that report either back to you as the individual if it's a self-screening account, or back to you as the Kiwanis organization if you've set up an account. So even though we use a lot of technology and processes here that are to ensure speed, we also have sets of human eyes that are looking at this, checking this, monitoring this, and making sure nothing is missed. And I think that's one of the added layers here that's so critical to the background screening process, is that you cannot completely cut human beings out of this process if you want to do this successfully. And so, I've created kind of a checklist, for, selecting a screening provider. And what are a few things that you really need to look at? Not only the accuracy of the information, but the security of the information. How is that information gathered? How is it stored? Are they using an online secured, ordering, platform? What kind of standards are they using with that in terms of, does it meet high industry standards, for securing that information? How does a screening firm screen their own employees? I can tell you we do this on an annual basis. I mean, we do full, deep background checks on all of our people annually. Are you using more than an incomplete national database? If you're doing an instant search, I can tell you right now, it's no good. So if you are using any kind of, volunteer screening program where you put information in and you get it back within, a couple seconds or a few minutes, that is not a quality screening program. If you're paying anywhere from $5 to, $14 or $15, I can about guarantee you that that's not a high quality screening program either. It's a lot of database information. Make sure you're using both the combination of National Criminal Database and county criminal searches. Make sure it's including alias names. We do that at no additional charge. Make sure the report's not being limited to 7 years unless, specifically required by state or local laws. And make sure that you have, the availability via telephone or email to answer the questions that you might have. We have direct dial numbers. We have, toll-free numbers, email, and you'll have all that contact information when you set up an account so that you can get your questions answered quickly and in a timely manner. So if you have more questions, you got my information on the front end. On the back end, Bridget Klum handles a lot of our, business development relationship with Kiwanis, and, she can be reached at our toll-free number here, or you can reach Bridget on her direct dial number, which is area code 317-451-4979. Or her email address here, which is bridget.klum@safehiringsolutions.com. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to partner with you. We've been partnering with Kiwanis International for more than 5 years now, and so we just hope that you have a fantastic day. Thanks.